So welcome everyone. I'm Annette Harris and I'm glad you're here today for budget building. So if you've been in the digging out of debt session, I want to say the same thing with the budget building. So tonight is not a lecture, it is a working session. So I will ask you to use the chat as we go. So this is a conversation where you can ask questions. And for tonight, what I want to do is two practical things together. So we're going to build a minimum viable snapshot of your budget, and I will explain that in detail as we get through tonight together. And also just to help you understand guessing and just start making progress just the right way with your budget. And then what we'll do is we're going to talk about just a simple transaction audit. So your budget draft that we're going to build tonight match actually what's happening in real life. Have these conversations. I want you to leave with something that you can do and have it actionable. So here's what we'll do. First, we'll cover the key pieces of a budget so you can see what's really happening with your money. And I'll say this, like I had a conversation with a client yesterday and she started running down her expenses with me. And I was like, okay, well, if you're making $6,000 a month, you're telling me that you have $400 left over, but she only gave me about $4,000 of her expenses. So I started asking those questions and I'm like, where else are you spending money? Do you have subscriptions? Do you have this? And she was like, well, now that you're asking me that, Annette, I do have this, or I forgot about this. And so that's why I want to help you build a draft budget so you can identify what are those expenses that you may not be thinking about, that may not be top of mind. And then from there, we're going to spot the areas that need the most attention that you're not trying, so that you're not trying to fix everything at once. It's kind of like those leaks that you may not think about that I just mentioned. And then by the end, I want you to have a draft budget tailored to your life and those clear action steps that you can take immediately. So if you're listening, let me make sure you're listening by typing ready into the chat, especially when you have your phone out, your notes app, or some paper handy as well. All right, so let's get into your one objective for the night, because those were some things that I said that you were going to leave with. So I want you to pick one outcome for the night. And this is before we dive into the numbers. I want you to pick that one budgeting objective, just one, because I'll say this repeatedly, like if you try to fix everything at once, you're going to leave feeling overwhelmed and essentially nothing will stick. And even with my clients, I try to go either as slow or as fast as they want to go when it comes to managing their finances or just understanding those basic concepts, which is budgeting. That's where everything starts. So I want you to think about what you need most right now: clarity, control, or consistency. And that one word is going to guide what you focus on this week. Like I said, you're going to have a 7-day action plan. And in the chat, I want you to type clarity, control, or consistency. And I'm going to explain each one of those as well. So if you choose clarity, that means that you want to stop guessing. That means that you want to know where your money is actually going. And if you're looking for clarity, I want you to think about the last time you checked your account and didn't feel confused or surprised. And that's the feeling that we're going to build. And this week, if you're choosing clarity, your job is simple. It's basically you're going to list everything, your income, your bills, and those little charges that pop up. And then once it's on paper, you stop feeling behind and you feel informed, and essentially you start building clarity. And if you choose control as your objective for the night, that means you're tired that your money is running the show. And this week, we're going to give you that one simple decision rule. And I'll say this, maybe it's a spending cap for dining out. So you can say, I'm going to spend $300 a month, on dining out. Or at the 24-hour pause before you hit buy, because listen, like Amazon is my trigger. So hitting that pause button. Or it's checking your budget before you leave the house on Saturday morning. And that control doesn't come from saying no to everything. It comes from making decisions on purpose. I don't want you to be overly restrictive because that means, I mean, you work hard for your money. It's just putting in those parameters and how you want to control your finances. And then let's talk about consistency for a minute. If that's the one that you're choosing as your objective, it means that you've tried budgeting before, but you just couldn't keep it going. Just kind of like that motivation behind it. So, and that's normal because this week's goal isn't a perfect month. It's just kind of like a repeatable routine, because if you've done this before and it hasn't worked, it's how do you make it stick? It's picking that weekly check-in day on your budget and a time, and just keeping it short. So even 15 minutes, and I'll explain a little bit about my routine too. And when you repeat that process, your confidence grows and the budget starts to work because you're actually using it. And that's that consistency. And I just want to give you a quick reminder, I want you to celebrate those small wins. If it's that one clear list that you're creating, or that one spending rule, or that one weekly check-in, you want to celebrate those small wins, because that's how you build a system that lasts, that consistency and that clarity and control. So I see that y'all have dropped a few in the chat, that clarity, consistency, and control. And I want you to remember what we're focusing on, as what you're focusing on as well. Okay. So budget plan and behavior. So I want to start with a quick story here. I love to tell stories because this is the part that most people skip. So I would say for me, there was a season when I would sit down, make a budget, feel proud, and then tell myself, this is the month. And then life would happen. And it was a bill I forgot. It was a busy week. It could have been like just a few quick swipes because I was tired or bored, just sitting on the couch watching television, had nothing to do. And I'm like, okay, what is Amazon recommending for me in the app? And Amazon loves to do that. And I would be like, okay, I got a new pair of shoes or a new dress. But what would happen is at the end of the month, I look up and think, how did I miss this again? How did my budget not work for me? And that's when it clicked for me, just kind of like that constantly happening, that my budget isn't magic. It's not going to work if I don't put that effort into it and have those consistent behaviors. Your budget is a plan. And like any other plan, it only works when your behavior, or my behavior, like backs up that plan that I put into place. So here's the equation that I live by now, and it's on the screen, screenshot it, whatever you need to do. That a budget plan plus behavior equals the outcome. And if the plan is strong, but my behavior isn't consistent, then nothing is going to change for me. But if your behavior is strong on the alternative and there's no plan, then I was going to have that hard work and still feel stuck. And I realized that I needed both. I needed a budget plan and that consistent behavior to have the outcome that I was looking for in helping me achieve my goals. And I do want to say this, your budget is not carved in stone. Your budget is a draft, it's a living and breathing thing that you constantly need to test, to adjust, and to just kind of like refine it so you can figure out what works for you. Like I said, you don't want it to be overly restrictive where it's something that you're dreading doing every weekend or every month. You want it to work for you as your situation and as your income and as life changes, because life happens. One more thing. Now, I will say this, motivation is not something that usually shows up first. It's that action that creates the motivation. That one check-in that you're going to do within the next 7 days, or that one transfer, or that one week of just sticking to that cap of spending money on groceries or eating out. That's that action that creates that motivation, and that's how your momentum starts. So you're not just going to get that motivation out of nowhere. You're going to say, I've been doing this for a week, or I've been doing this for 2 weeks. I'm going to continue doing it. And that's how you get that motivation to change your behaviors. Now, I want you to type draft in the chat if you are open to treating your budget like a draft that you refine and not a test that you pass or fail. And I'll say this too, like when I'm working with my clients in that first initial session that we have, I'm saying, let's start tracking your expenses. Let's see what you can identify within this first month, and then let's see how we can make adjustments. And that's what we do. And I'm saying these are adjustments based on my suggestions, but it's also their action. It's their goal, it's their budget. I only provide recommendations. All right, so we're going to treat our budget as a draft. And as we do that, I have a simple way of breaking budgeting down. And this is the budget triangle. It's because most people don't need that overly complicated budget. You just need a clear one. And there's 3 pillars to the budget triangle. First, at the top, which is most important, is your baseline bills. And these are those must-pay things that keep your life running. They're your housing, like mortgage or rent, your utilities, your insurance, which could be homeowners or your car rental insurance or your car insurance, transportation, and then groceries. So those are kind of like those fixed expenses that you need to just live life, to have a place to live, and just to keep life running. And then you have those variable leaks. So these are those, I would say, sneaky things. It isn't bad, but it can add up fast when you're trying to budget. It's dining out, it's Amazon, those convenience purchases, subscriptions, just kind of like those little extras, and they sometimes are unplanned. And then the third part of this pillar, this triangle, is your irregular expenses. So these are not the every month expenses, but they show up every year. For example, like car repairs, medical bills, travel, annual renewals, your HOA fees. You may pay them monthly, you may pay them once a year, or just kind of like school costs for your kids. So things that you can sometimes plan for, but they just don't happen every single month. And then, so when I sort my spending into these 3 areas, that's where I can immediately see where my stress is coming from. And then once I know what's driving the problem of my stress, I can make the moves in the right way, where instead of trying to fix everything at once, I can plan for those irregular expenses, those variable leaks, and then just kind of like my baseline bills that happen every single month. So I got another chat prompt for y'all. All right, and I'm going to explain these 2 where I want to understand what's causing you the most heartache. B, type in B for baseline bills, those monthly expenses. V for variable expenses. Again, those things like Amazon, those convenience purchases, or I just for those irregular expenses. I see a lot of B's. I see the B's. And I also want to give you solutions too. So if baseline bills are the ones that are squeezing you, it usually means the numbers are tight or the timing is tight. So when it's this, you want to start with that stability, mapping your bills to paydays, looking for anything you can renegotiate, and making sure you're not paying for those avoidable add-ons and fees. I like to tell this story. I don't know if y'all still have DirecTV, but I used to have DirecTV. Every year DirecTV would say you're going to receive an increase. It's a $10 increase, or a $15 increase. And I was fine with it because it was those incremental increases. And I'm like, you typically get a 3% salary increase every year. And I'm like, I can cover $10 in this monthly expense. But I started my DirecTV bill and all of our boxes, and it was like $119. My DirecTV bill got up to $230 a month. We had boxes in our guest bedroom and our master bedroom that we weren't even using. We had one in our children's bedroom and in our living room. And I was like, you know what? I'm done with this. I'm going to go wireless, go Hulu, whatever. started paying $70 for Hulu, canceled DirecTV, and then DirecTV said, we'll keep the boxes. We don't want them. I'm like, I was paying $7 for each one of these boxes and y'all don't want it back. But then they also said, hey, like if you come back to us, you can pay $175 a month as opposed to the 200, I think it was $220 a month. But I'm like, had I stayed with them, I would have kept paying the same price. And that's why I say you all have type B as like the baseline as what's causing you the most heartache. You can renegotiate the prices that you're paying for your expenses. There's probably deals. If you call and say, I'm canceling, they're like, well, instead of canceling, we can give you a discount. It may give you a little heartache, a little more, because like, why didn't you offer me that discount before? But it can help you identify where you can have some extra money in your budget for those monthly expenses that you have. And it can also free up some money for saving or paying down debt or investing, whatever you want to do with that surplus of money that you have. So all I see is B's. So I don't see any V's as the variable expenses. But if you do have V's, it usually just kind of like that busy life plus convenience. And the fix for that is pick your top one or your two leak categories and just set a cap for that you can actually keep. Yes, Stacy, I see you cut the 230 for cable and like Netflix $7 a month. Netflix is going up now, but it's like that $230 that you have. I also want to say that when you do save that money, it's important for you to identify, okay, what are you doing with that extra money now? That surplus that you have. If it is essentially extra money in your budget, moving that money to savings or, putting it towards something else, some other debt that you may have so that you can reduce your debt or just have that emergency fund and just kind of like build your nest egg that you have. When it comes to I, those are regular expenses, kind of like that's kind of like those ambushes that where for those you want to establish a sinking fund if you have those irregular annual expenses. So just setting aside that small amount each month so that if you do have something like your tire goes flat or something, you have that money set aside so you're not depending on credit for that. So it's essential, like for those irregular expenses, to just set a little bit each month so your budget doesn't blow up. Now, I know a lot of y'all type B, so keep that letter in mind, as we go through and just talk about how we're going to handle that so you don't feel overwhelmed. So let's stop the leak and identify your faucet. And I call this stop the leak because a lot of the time it's not just that one big expense that's throwing you off. It's that one habit that keeps draining the plan. So I say this, I used to make a budget and still feel like, okay, my money disappeared. And what I changed for me was stop treating that progress like, okay, whatever's left at the end of the month. And I'm going to put that towards my debt or I'm going to put that towards saving. So I started tying it to one positive move to payday so that it happened on purpose. So it's a 3-step move when you talk about identifying what your faucet is. So the faucet is something that quietly kind of like refills the spending, like where you're saying, okay, I have this much money I have left to spend. And for a lot of people, it's Amazon, it's eating out, it's those convenient purchases. For me, it's Stitch Fix. Because a couple of years ago, I lost weight and I'd hate to go shopping in the store. I found a belt one time. So I was like, let Stitch Fix do it for me. Let me go back. I was like, let Stitch Fix do it for me. And so now I'm addicted to Stitch Fix. So that's identify your faucet. Like, what's that one thing that says, okay, I'll just grab it real quick, and just spend the money on it. And the next thing that you want to do is pause the faucet and pause the faucet long enough so that you can create traction. Not forever, but just long enough to see the change where you can prove to yourself that your plan works. And even 14 days makes a difference. Now, for me, I used to get Stitch Fix every single month. I was like, send me some, 5 new pieces because I never like had a full outfit. But then what I did for that, I said, you know what? I'm going to go from Stitch Fix every month to every 3 months. And then that every 3 months turned into every 6 months because I was like, why am I spending $250 on 5 pieces of clothing? But because I moved Stitch Fix from every month to every 3 months, it helped me identify that this is where I'm spending a lot of my money at. And because I put that pause on it, I put that pause on it even longer, which added money back into my budget for other things that I wanted to spend on. And then the third thing is I attached that to payday. So with that, I automated my savings because Stitch Fix came religiously like on the 15th of the month, and that was when I got paid. So I said, okay, instead of spending that money on Stitch Fix, I have an extra $250 every month. I'm going to automatically transfer that to my savings account. Now, for you, that could be transferring it to savings. It could be putting an extra payment toward a credit card, or it could be just creating that sinking fund that you have, whether or not it's for travel, those irregular expenses, or just whatever you're building like your wealth for. So for me, I didn't want the progress to depend on how I felt at the end of the month. I wanted to purposefully plan for how I wanted to save my money and what I was saving it for, or why I was paying down my debt. So that's what worked for me, but that's kind of like that 3-step move is identify your faucet, pause, and the faucet is what's causing you that most, where's that leak at? And then pausing the faucet long enough to create traction with what your goal is, and then attaching that positive move to payday. And again, I want this to be interactive. So in the chat, type in what your faucet is. That one thing that you say is draining your budget. Here's the key too. Whatever your faucet is, I don't want you to try to fix everything at once. Like I said, it's gradual. Just pick that one thing to say on it, because we can't say kids. Yes, groceries, subscriptions, drive-through eating. You just pick that one thing and just say, this is the one thing that I'm going to pause for this 14 days. And that could be, like you said, okay, wait, eating out. Fast food is a lot. I see that a lot with my clients, the fast food. It's tough. It's convenient. It's easy. And it gives you time back in your day to do other things. So, and I'll say this, if that's your faucet, it's putting a limit on eating out. I don't want you to just stop doing it. You could even say, okay, instead of spending, when you look at your budget, $300 a month on eating out, or if you eat out 5 times a week, let's go to 3, or let's go to 2 to see how that feels. Now, you do have to swap that out for something else, which is grocery planning. So it all takes action so that you can create that motivation. All right, Amazon, auto subscriptions, household stuff. Yes, online is a killer for me because I'm not a fan of going into the store either. Either way, consistency and it is the multiplier of this. So just staying consistent with your actions. So thank y'all for sharing that. Yes, subscriptions. And I'll say this, it is really essential to check your phone. If you go into your app store, not sure what it's called on the Google phone or Samsung, but if you go into your app store, see what subscriptions you have that you haven't canceled. And I'll say this, when it comes to subscriptions, I may get an app that I download and it says you get a free trial for 7 days. I immediately go in and cancel that subscription. You still get the free trial, but then it ends at the end of the 7 days and you don't have to remember and you don't get that charge either. So I do that for Amazon if I need HBO for 7 days and I cancel the subscription. So you still get it. But that subscription is that drainer, and it could save you at minimum $50 to $100 a month for subscriptions that you forgot you had. All right. So I also want to talk about the order that makes budgeting work. So just want to get back on track here. So, and I'll say this, when people tell me that budgeting doesn't work, most of the time it's not the budget, it's the order. And they start with categories, get frustrated, and then quit. And so I want to give you an order that makes this a little bit simpler and just kind of like doable. So These are the three ways that you can make your budget work. So you start with cash flow first, and that's your pay dates and your bill due dates. Because you can have a good budget on paper and still feel broke by Wednesday if your timing is off. It's all about the dates of when you're getting paid, semi-monthly, weekly, bi-weekly, whatever, or monthly, whatever that looks like, and lining that up to what hits your account based on the day that you get paid. And that way, fewer things surprise you. So, for example, I get paid semi monthly on the 15th and the 30th of the month. At the before the 30th hits, I say, okay, these are the bills that are going to hit on the first of the month. So I know I'm getting paid this set amount on the 30th. I copy and paste that into my check register, and I go ahead and add in the bills that are automatically going to come out before I get paid again on the 15th. And then I say, okay, by the 15th, how much money am I going to have left over? And I say, okay, it's going to be $500 left over. That's going to be for groceries, my personal care items, things like that. And then when I get paid on the 15th, I drop that in because it stays the same for at least 11 months out of the year. And then I'll say, okay, what items are coming out after the 15th? So then I know automatically what am I going to have left over at the end of the month to say either I need to reduce my spending in a certain area, or I need to basically increase my cash flow that's coming in. And that's easier said than done. But that's where that renegotiation of the bills that you have comes into place. Like, let me go back to it. Stacy that said she cut the cord with cable and saved $230 a month. So that's where increasing your and that Stacy didn't increase her cash flow, but she decreased what was going out of her checking account. So once you kind of like identify your cash flow, what's coming in and then what's going out, you want to set those categories and limits. So this is where you tell your money where to go on purpose, and it helps you catch those leaks that are coming out of your checking account. And those leaks usually aren't those big purchases. It's the little frequent stuff that adds up. Like I said, when you're sitting on a couch, busy, tired, or just trying to make life easier. A lot of you all said the eating out, the DoorDash, things like that. Those are those leaks. So you want to set those limits or those caps on those certain categories. And then once you name that leak, you don't feel restricted your whole life. Now, for me and my husband, it's just two. We're empty nesters. So we have an eating out budget of $300 a month. And because we have that cap, we stay within it. If we say, okay, we went out twice and we spent $250, well, we're not going to go out again and spend $50. We're saying we're done for the month. Like that's our cap. We also have a grocery cap of $400, and we stay within that cap. Now, there are months where you go over, like Thanksgiving or, around the holidays, but at the end of the year, it balances out because we set that cap, we're able to stay within that limit. And we try really hard to stay within those limits that we've set for ourselves. Now, the third part of making it a budget that works is that weekly review to adjust. And this is what makes budgeting sustainable because life changes every week. Gas changes. I just paid $4.999 on a gallon of gas. So that kind of shocked me. So, and it's continuing to go up, y'all. So, gas changes, groceries change, just something pops up. And if you only check your budget once a month, then you're kind of like reacting after the fact. So those weekly check-ins let you adjust in real time so that your budget becomes a tool that you use and not just something that you avoid. And so for me, I have a joint budget that me and my husband have, and then we have separate budgets that we have on our own. So it's very essential that I budget weekly because I need to know what he's spending so that I can ensure that I'm also staying in budget, but that we're also staying in budget together. Yes, gas, groceries, and utilities have gone up. Yes, absolutely. And I'm in Florida, so they're continuing to skyrocket. Again, those are the three ways that you can make your budget work. And I also want you all, just as a reminder, to type your letter in the chat again. I know a lot of y'all type B, for those baseline expenses that were affecting your budget. But I also want you to type in like that one word of how it feels like right now. How do you feel with those baseline expenses causing that heartache with your budget? It could make you feel heavy, right? Stress. And when you feel stress, you want to go straight to like timing and stability. You want to make sure that your essentials are clear first, and then look for anything that you can reduce, renegotiate, or restructure. Yes, uneasy. Because if you're uneasy, you're not, okay, how am I going to afford this bill? Even overwhelming too. And that's why I say when you identify that leak, just focus on that one thing where you can make that adjustment. Because once you start making adjustments in that one category, then other categories also tend to follow. It could also make you feel frustrated because you're like, it's always something. It's always something that needs to be paid, or, Netflix is increasing in May. It's just that one thing that's constantly happening. But, you want to create that simple rule so that you still have freedom, but that you don't stop that faucet, that leak that's coming out of your budget. You could still have a little drip, but you just don't want a leak. Yes, you want to stay on top of your expenses more because things are constantly going up. And I'll say this too, adult children don't have their portion of bills. And that's a separate conversation as well. I've had a client where they have two adult children, one is special needs, one they are encouraging them to get a job, and it's having that conversation with your adult children to say, hey, I need you to, this is where we're at financially, within a household. And if they have a job, just having that conversation to see what they can contribute to the household. It's not an easy conversation. And when I have budget conversations, I like to use the word we, especially if they are within the household, instead of you, I, me. It's that we, because you're all working on this together, and just framing that conversation that you're trying to ensure that you all have stability within the household. I'll say this, now that you've named what's stressing you out, there's a lot of things stressing us out. Let's talk about why those patterns exist in the first place. Because once you understand where your habits come from, it's easier to build a new system that kind of like sticks. And I'm glad that you bring up children as well, because I also want to talk about kind of like what shaped my budget habits. So I'll say this, a lot of our budgeting habits didn't start with us. They started with what we saw, what we heard, and what we experienced growing up. And it could be some things that your children heard or saw as well, or the conversations you've had. Now, for me, my mom did shape a lot of my habits and just kind of like how I think about money. She managed her money well, and what stood out was this. People came to her, my aunts, my cousins always came to her when they needed help, but she always still had enough for herself. So she was a single mother of three, and I never saw her constantly scrambling. She had a system, and just watching her taught me that budgeting just isn't about being strict. It's about being prepared. Now, I did stumble along the way, but I also always kept in the back of my mind, like, hey, this is what I learned from my mother. All of our backgrounds are different, but some of us grew up with, I said this, money being tight, unpredictable, or stressful, like some of you have mentioned already. And some of us grew up hearing, we don't talk about money, or we'll figure it out later. And so I'll say this, like LaKenya saying right now, like if your family's money habits didn't serve you, like I want to say that your past kind of like may explain your habits or why you have that lack of knowledge about finances, but it doesn't decide like how your future is going to shape you or how you're going to leave after this call today. because your budget is not a character grade. It's a decision system, and all systems can be rebuilt. Like I said, your budget is a living, breathing thing that you constantly adjust and evaluate. So I like to be a little bit motivational too, because I want tonight's goal to be not where you've been. It's to notice just kind of like one pattern that you want to change, and then choose a new strategy that matches the life that you're trying to rebuild. And that's how you break those cycles. It's that one decision at a time. And just to kind of like, I like to put things in writing, because once you put them in writing, it helps you act upon it. And I want you to write in the chat, fresh start, if your family history has slowed your progress, right? And I like, Rasha, like you were showing the method, but just not explained to it clearly. And that's why we're here today, to help you all get your budget on track. And we've talked about, family history, and we're all going to go on a fresh start today. So I want to get a little bit practical, because I want you to leave here with something today. So we're going to talk about in a few the simplest way to start building your new system. And this is what I talked about originally, is the new minimum viable snapshot. So a new mindset about money. Yes, Annette. All right. So I want to talk about how I build a budget. So I want to share this method because it takes budgeting for me from overwhelming to manageable. And I don't start with perfection. I just start with a system. So step one is this minimum viable snapshot. And that's essentially the smallest set of numbers that you need to start making decisions right now without getting stuck. And it's not about building a masterpiece on day one. It's building a draft that you can trust. And the minimum viable snapshot is essentially this, where you're looking at your budget. Okay, what is my budget? What is the income that I have coming in on a monthly basis? What is my partner's salary? Do you receive any public assistance? Do you have Social Security? Any type of disability if you're a military veteran? And you put that in your budget column. Then you list out all of your other expenses that you have. And this is kind of like the transaction audit. So that's where you're saying, okay, this is what you think is happening, and you compare it to what's actually happening. So on the left column, you're saying, this is what I want to budget. For electricity, I'm going to budget $150. For gas, I'm going to budget telephone, $250. And then what you do is you identify what's actually happening. And that's that second column. For the next 4 weeks, a month, you track what you're spending every single week. And with my clients, what they identify is by week 2, they say, Annette, the budget that I have, that I thought that I was spending, I'm actually spending more than that. And they start making adjustments within those first 2 weeks. Some of them do come back after like our 30-day check-in, and they say, okay, I've made these adjustments. Where can I continue to further refine it? But this is that transaction audit where you thought you were spending $300 on eating out in restaurants, but I had one client spending $1,500 eating out at restaurants. She was going 3 times a day for her boyfriend, her mother, and her aunt who were living with her. And I was like, hey, you need to start setting some parameters around this, because you have all this debt, you have these payday loans, you have these credit cards. But until she did this transaction audit and started tracking it, that's when she realized that she was actually spending 23% of the money that she had coming in a month eating out, because it's expensive. And then once you have your minimum viable snapshot, which is your budget, and then your transaction audit, that's where we refine and automate, like I just said. And that's when the budget gets a little bit easier, because you reduce that friction, and you're not left wondering anymore, like, I thought I had $500 left over in the month, but I just don't know where it goes. This is where you're able to identify where those leaks are, and you're just not relying on your memory or just kind of like willpower every day. So this is what I suggest, write down what you think you spend, groceries, eating out, gas, Amazon, whatever your categories are. And then I want you to look at what you actually spend. And you do this by using bank account transactions. Because you can do this week to week, but you can also download in Excel, like what you have that's hitting your bank account. And that's like your reality check as well. Now, I will say this. I've talked about the minimum viable snapshot, your transaction audit and refine and edit. And we also talked about having a fresh start. So type system in the chat if you're ready to build that system and stop relying on willpower or mental math, because mental math is where a lot of people get caught up as well. Like I said, I had the client I was working with yesterday, and she was like, Annette, I have $400 left over. And I'm like, you have a $2,000 gap. Like, where is all of that money going? All right, so let's talk a little bit more in detail about the minimum viable snapshot. So this is how you start budgeting without getting stuck. Again, like I said, because perfection is usually that thing that keeps you from starting at all. We're not looking for perfection. It's instead of trying to track everything, I want you to focus on these four numbers that give you clarity. First, it's your monthly take-home income, not your gross income, because we can all do, our gross income, our salary, and divide it by 24 or 52. That's not what's hitting your bank account. So I want to see what's actually hitting your account that you actually have to spend. Second is your top fixed bills. And when you get the spreadsheet, that's what you're going to put on there, your top fixed bills. Those big non-negotiable things like your housing, your car payment, insurance, utilities, and those things that keep your life stable. Third is your top two variable categories. So these are the two areas, kind of like groceries, dining out, you got to eat, y'all. But you don't have to spend $1,500 eating out. And Amazon, gas, whatever it is for you. So if we can see your top two, you can usually find that missing money really quickly. And then fourth is your minimum monthly obligations. So that includes your minimum debt payments, because this matters because we want your budget to be real. I don't want you to pretend that those payments don't exist. I don't want you to not open your mailbox or not look at that email or anything like that. I want you to look at those minimum debt payments. And then from there, you can focus on, okay, how can I increase what I'm paying on debt? And that's not today. We just want to look at what your credit card company or the loan company is saying is your minimum debt payments. And then once you have those four things, you can answer this powerful question: am I dealing with a true shortfall, or is this a timing and tracking problem? And that's why this work, it gives you that clarity without overwhelming you. And I would say do this within the next 24 hours. Take a screenshot of this, because I want this to stay small and doable, and just give you that one quick win to give you that energy to do the next step. And then once you have your minimum viable snapshot, you've done the hard part. These four things, y'all, like, this is the hard part. And then it can help you move from I don't know where to start to I have the basics in front of me. So I want to talk about this paper surplus versus real life surplus as well. I don't know if you've ever heard of paper surplus, but this is when your spreadsheet says you have more money left over, but your bank account is telling a different story. On paper, it looks like you're doing fine, but in real life, you're like, where did that money go? And that's where this budget tracker is going to help you realize where that money is going. And then you have the gap. That difference is the gap. It's the space between what the budget says should happen and what's actually happening day to day. And I want you to hear this today. So the gap is not that it's not showing proof that you failed. The gap is where your answer lives. That's where you're going to find that something that's missing. It's something that you underestimated, or something is happening in real life where your budget didn't capture it. And then you're going to prove it with transactions. So we don't guess, we prove it. Like I said, that those 4 weeks in that tracker, you're going to look at those transactions and let that tell the story to you. And that's how you find the leaks, the timing issues, and those one-offs that keep just kind of like wiping out that surplus that you think you have. And then once you see it clearly, you can redirect that money on purpose into savings, your debt payoff, or those planned expenses, whether or not they're monthly or annual. And it will help you stop watching your money just disappear. And I want you to type prove it in the chat if you're going to prove it to yourself using the tracker. You don't even have to use the tracker. You can use your own system, but I want you to type prove it if you're going to stop guessing and just bridge the gap between your transactions. Awesome. And like, we're going to hold each other accountable too, y'all. Like, remember the names in the chat. So, okay, this is the part where we want to change everything too, because we stop guessing and we let the data tell the truth. And this is, we talked about the transaction audit. Step one is you're going to start with your budget draft, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Then you want to download the last 30 days of transactions from the accounts that you actually use. If you have access to that, download 30 days of transactions and then compare it to your budget draft. Not to judge yourself, just to see what's real, like what's really happening. And then you'll be able to identify what those leaks are. What are those categories where you need to adjust your budget, cut costs, call DirecTV, Hulu, whatever, to renegotiate, get rid of Disney Plus. That's where you want to identify those leakage categories, or stop spending money on, or reduce what you're spending on Amazon. And then you want to set those caps. And then you want to just kind of like automate your budget, so that you have these transfers, or that you're looking at your budget based on the paychecks that you have coming in. And then the win here is simple. Like, once you, like, this is your win. Like, once you know where your money is going, that's where you can redirect it on purpose, and it gets rid of that overwhelm and that stress that some of you are feeling. And like I said, just taking a look at the last 30 days of transactions, or using any budget that you have, any budget tracker where you can track your expenses for the next 30 days. I want you to meet Miguel. And this is not his real picture. He is a prior client of mine. And like Miguel, on paper, his spreadsheet showed a surplus. He actually showed me that he had an additional $2,000 a month after all of his bills are paid. But he was like, Annette, I don't know where the money's going. He was like, I just feel like it's disappearing. So with Miguel, we didn't argue about numbers. We used that personal budget. He tracked his expenses. What Miguel found out after he built his minimum viable snapshot, that he was spending $1,500 a month on Amazon. And he was like, Annette, it's junk. He was like, I don't even know what this stuff is. He was like, I'm just sitting here and I'm just spending money on Amazon. And with Miguel, I was like, hey, like, I want you to identify what those purchases are and make the adjustments. If you've identified this gap, like, where can you pull back? But with Miguel, we identified, okay, you have debt too, because him and his wife had debt. And I said, let's give that money a job. You do have that. It had him in a chokehold. Yes. I said, your focus in working with me is to pay down this debt. They had 15 different credit cards that they had together. And I said, I want to give this money a job. And when we gave that money a job, his wife was able to pay off the credit cards, because he was ended up funding her credit cards. To pay off the credit cards, we redirected the money into those planned buckets for his debt, his savings, because he wanted to travel. Him and his wife are retired. And then we just kind of put that simple rule in place. And I was like, Miguel, if you are thinking about an Amazon purchase, check with your wife. Like, y'all have this conversation. And it didn't happen overnight. Like, we worked together for a couple of months, and he ended up reducing it off a lot of their debt. But that was just kind of like building that snapshot, helped him identify, well, this is my leak, and these are my goals too, and I need to make some adjustments. And that's when, he was like, this is what matters most to me, is that I want to enjoy my life. I've worked hard for it. And identifying where I'm spending all my money, it stopped him waiting for like that perfect month. and started him building that momentum on purpose. So first he could stop using credit and then start focusing on what his goals were, getting rid of that debt. So this is just kind of like Miguel's success story. Lots of others like it when you have that act that also creates that motivation. And this is the weekly cash flow meeting that I use. It's the reason that my budget actually works. So with me, I have my weekly cash flow meeting once a week, every Saturday morning before my husband gets up. I take 15 minutes to just see what have we spent our money on within the last week. And then I do a check-in to make sure that we're on track. And I ask only 3 questions of myself. First, what has to be paid before the next payday? Second, what repeats every month, no matter what? Like I said, the 15th and the 30th, what can I copy and paste so that I can assure by the time I get to next payday, I have that money that's available? And then third, based on what happened this week, what do I need to adjust, or kind of like what's on track? And that's it. And that weekly check-in keeps the month from slipping away and my money from slipping away. It also stops surprises, just kind of like from turning into emergencies. And I'm telling y'all, it's 20 minutes Saturday morning before you walk out the door and go shopping. It can give you a reality check. And then at the end of the month, it makes the next month easier because I just copy my pay dates and my fixed bills and paste it to the next month, so I know what that looks like. And that way I'm not just rebuilding my budget from scratch every time. I'm just updating it based on what's really happened that prior week and in that prior month. It's just a simple copy and paste. And then it helps me say, okay, keep my husband on track too with spending stuff on the house. So I think this is very essential for you to have this weekly check-in. And if you are committed to this, like you said, you are going to prove it. I want you to type the day that you will do your weekly money meeting in the chat. And when you type it, I want you to also write it down somewhere else, put a reminder on your phone that you are actually going to do it that day, and give yourself 20 minutes to do a budget check-in. And I circle Saturday because Saturday is my day. So before I go shopping, yes, Money Mondays. You already told me in the chat what you're going to do. You're going to prove it. You have your budget check-in on Mondays and Saturdays. The majority of you, I see a Sunday morning, and I love that because now you've got witnesses too. You said it out loud or you typed it out loud, and that matters. So for the next 7 days, let's keep it simple and keep it moving. I want you to first run your 30-day transaction audit, pull the last 30 days from the accounts you actually used, and compare it to your budget draft. Just that one-line budget draft. No judging yourself, just proving where the money is going so you can take control of it. Second, start something positive with one automatic transfer, $5. This is your I'm serious move. This is your I'm going to prove it move. And this is how you're going to stop relying on motivation and start relying on that action that we talked about at the beginning, and relying on that system. And then third, putting your weekly money meeting on the calendar in your phone as a weekly reminder. Treat it like an appointment because, like I said, life happens fast. And if you don't schedule it, then the week's going to slip away. And then here's the accountability piece. You told me that you're doing this with, Sunday, Saturday morning. Just keep that in the front of your mind and let's hold each other to it. I also want you all to just stick to these 3 simple commitments and just choose one action you're going to do within 24 hours, one action you're going to complete within the next 7 days, and one action you'll complete within the next 30 days. And just keep them realistic. And the goal is follow through, action, not a perfect plan. One action in 7 days, within the next 7 days, is to schedule that weekly money meeting. I've made that one easy for y'all. And then I want you to just, take a breath for a second. We've talked about a lot, and I'll say you don't have to fix everything tonight. You just have to take that next right step, because consistency is what builds your confidence. That's all I got for y'all. And if you have questions, you can also drop those in the chat in the Q&A box as well. But if you would like to get in touch with me, I'm here to support you, and you can reach out to me. Here's my email, scan my QR code. I'm here for y'all.